Indo-European, this lost language, was the source of both Sanskrit in the East and Latin in the West. That's why there are so many words between Sanskrit and English that are aligned, like yoga and yoke. The Hindu god of fire, Agni, and the English word ignition, or to ignite, or even cognition.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Sunday Forum. Today is the third of our five-part workshop series on Peter Bowen's book, The Seven Stone Path. We're very honored to have Peter back today. Peter, as you know, local author, philosopher, professor, musician. Am I leaving anything out? So today we're covering chapters 4 and 5, I believe. Yes, okay. So before I turn it over to Peter, just a gentle reminder that there is a free workbook to accompany this workshop. If you forgot your workbook from last week, we do have a few extra copies on the back table. You can also download it online for free if you want to save some paper. And if you haven't yet purchased a copy of the Seven Stone Path, you can do that here today. So let me turn it over to Peter then.
Thank you, Sterling, and thanks for praying us in, and let me make sure I do that before I forget it. Oh my goodness, it's so wonderful to be back here. What a nice group of friendly faces to see. I appreciate you all so much for coming to these events, and I'm so grateful to our cathedral dean, the very Reverend Penny Bridges, who invited me to present my book over 5 Sundays during Lent. That was an incredible email to get, and I'm really honored. If you don't know, all of the many elements of learning and joy and connection that happen here at St. Paul's Cathedral, the whole campus, this is a really hidden gem, the best kept secret in San Diego. Every Sunday at 9 a.m. there is this thing here called the Adult Forum, and it's a wonderful confluence of theology and philosophy and inquiry and sometimes travel and different authors and different voices from different spiritual traditions. That's one of the many things I love about the Episcopalian world is its openness to rational inquiry, scholarship, ecumenical, inclusive thinking, and the idea that God gave us a brain and we should probably use it, and not blindly follow anything. And that spirit of inquiry and of investigation is really nourishing for me and for a lot of folks around here. So I did want you to know that. It isn't just these 5 Sundays when I'm here. This rolls on. And I've been to so many great sessions here. And so I just want to put that plug in for the program in general. So yes, here we are in session 3 of 5 sessions, and it's rooted in the book, of course, The Seven Stone Path, An Everyday Journey to Wisdom, which, if you are not aware, and I try to design these sessions for readers of the book and for folks who've never heard of this book until this moment, wandered in here by accident looking for another meeting, and here you are. And so I wanted to let you know a little bit, and for everybody just to go back over it. This is a book about wisdom. What is it? Why do we need it? How do we get it? And by looking over all of the world's wisdom traditions, the religions and the philosophies, as a student, a lifelong student of those things, and then as a college professor of those subjects for the last 30 plus years, it occurred to me that certain ideas were rising to the surface that I was finding present in all these different traditions. We might call them archetypal ideas. I'm not the first person to notice this. This is an old idea. Aldous Huxley wrote a book in the mid-20th century called The Perennial Philosophy that in some ways inspired me to kind of follow this path a little bit more. Let's take another crack at that. You know, that was 70, 80 years ago. And he had his own interests and biases, and I have mine. So let's do it again and see what we can find rising to the surface. So that's where these 7 ideas come from. The visual image of the book is, let's imagine these 7 ideas as stepping stones. And you can't really get to the fifth one until you've done 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there is definitely a sequence in my mind about how these ideas work together. We started with acceptance, coming into some sort of acceptance of these current conditions. And the second stone is called surrender. And we find that idea throughout so many spiritual traditions as well. To realize that I am not running the universe, but I am present in it. And the more I release my egoic control, the more empowered I become. I know it's a paradox. And we'll solve all the paradoxes in chapter 7. But on to the third stone. The third stone was, okay, now that we've accepted and surrendered, let's enter the field of action. In other words, the wisdom of engagement. And so we thought about that quite a bit last week. What is action? What is right action, as Buddha would call it? What is action without attachment to the fruits of action? And that was a very fruitful inquiry for us to engage in. So today we are up to 4 and 5, excuse me. And 4 is the wisdom of allowance, and 5 is wisdom of enjoyment. So we'll try to touch on both of those in as thorough a way as we can in the next 53 minutes. And let me start with just a brief check-in with how we might connect some of these things together. I'm going to read from page 128 if you have your book with you, 128 and 129. And I also want to mention that we're trying to run these sessions as much as possible as discussions. I don't want to stand here and tell you what the book says. I'll drop some ideas in, but I'm going to ask a number of questions, and I really invite you to respond if you're willing, and we're going to run a microphone around because we need all of your comments and questions to be on the microphone. You need to hear your voice coming from the ceiling like God. I'm going to read just a brief section from 128 to kind of connect everything we've done so far and open up this inquiry into the wisdom as allowance. What does that mean? Because allowance, when I hear that word, I think of my mom giving me a quarter, a week or a month or whatever it was in 1968 when I was 10. I think now it's $20 a week or something. I have no idea what allowances. They probably give kids a debit card or something. There's probably an app. But anyway, that's not what I mean by allowance, as you'll see. So far in our journey toward wisdom, we have accepted current conditions, surrendered the ego to our larger purpose, and engaged with life in the field of action. Now it is time to move into deeper accord with the generative intelligence of the universe through allowance. Acceptance is acknowledging the facts of existence and moving into non-resistance. Surrender is admitting our powerlessness. That phrase will sound familiar to some of you. Engagement is entering willingly and decisively into the field of action. And allowance is ensuring that our actions move in accord with what is already unfolding. So allowance is a refinement of what we discussed in the last chapter, namely right action. Allowance is a kind of action, and to go on with a few more lines. The state of allowance is not the same as passivity. Allowance is a deeply perceptive state characterized by open-mindedness, willingness, awareness, and intuition. Wisdom traditions all over the world recognize this condition of consciousness as a requisite element of mastery. So I was caught by that. I'm a big fan of Taoism and the Tao Te Ching and the two key philosophers of this ancient Chinese wisdom tradition, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. And from Taoism, we get this idea of Wu Wei. And Wu Wei literally means not doing, non-action. But it would be a mistake to understand Wu Wei as passivity. Lying on the couch all day and eating bonbons does not make you a Taoist master. What the suggestion instead with Wu Wei is that the most effective action is action that moves in accord with what is already unfolding. And the example of surfing comes to mind for me, and it's discussed a little bit in this chapter toward the end, that when a surfer goes to the beach to surf, she stands on the shore and looks out at the waves. And it is a process of discernment and attention and presence. She has no control over the waves, if I may state the obvious. Waves are energy systems that are moving through the medium of water. You know, waves aren't even material things. They inhabit the material of the water. And so for a surfer to go out in the water and ride waves, she has to very energetically and I would say forcefully paddle out through the waves that are coming toward her. And one of the hardest things to learn as a beginning surfer is not how to stand up on your board. That's one problem. But I think the more difficult problem is putting yourself in the right place out there. Because you're literally in a fluid field with no landmarks. It's nothing but change. And she has to discern with her experience and her attention to put herself facing toward the shore, paddling in the same direction as the wave, as the water becomes more, as the shore rises up and the water depth becomes more shallow, the energy wave rises up out of the water. And you want to be right at that spot where it's big enough to catch, but not so far into shore that it's already broken over on you. It's a tricky thing. Nobody can tell you how to do that. And so my point with all of this is, and let's not talk about surfing anymore, we're always making analogies. Maybe this is wisdom about how to navigate my family, how to navigate my professional struggles, how to navigate my money problems, how to navigate the challenge of the longing to create something and all the obstacles in the way. How do I move into accord with the energies that are already unfolding? That's what I mean by allowance. So it's a very active thing, but it has little to do with ego or arbitrary goal grasping. It has to do with cooperation more than assertion. But it's a curious kind of alchemy of both. I want to open up a little bit, so Sterling, I'll need your microphone here. If anybody raises their hand when I ask this question. It's the first question in the workbook. If any of you are looking at that, I'm on page 13. The first question is, share a story of a time when you were trying very hard to accomplish something, but it was only when you stopped trying that you achieved your aim. How can that be explained? So, Robert, can we come up here? Thank you.
Well, I keep beating this horse to death, but every time I think about cello playing when I read your book. And if you play any kind of a musical instrument, there are two things that you need to know. One is that the instrument is not your enemy. And if you find a teacher who makes you feel that way, then you need to pack up your cello and go home. And I fortunately don't have such a teacher. And as I started into the Bach suites, I wanted to play them by George. And away I went, and every day I was practicing, and very hard stuff. It's very hard. It looks very easy on paper, but they're not easy. And so finally, Andrew said to me, you know, Robert, this is music. You're trying to make music, not be accomplished as a, so that was exactly what was going on here. Allowing myself to relax into the music and to hear what Bach had to say and not what I had to say. And by George, it worked, Suddenly I'm playing the first prelude of the C major suite.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and all it takes is just a surrender.
Getting out of your way.
Yeah.
Beautiful story. That's exactly what I had in mind. I've experienced that as a musician as well, to simply enjoy the song, maybe, enjoy the music, and not think about how assertive you have to be to get your fingers in the right place. Anybody else have a little vignette like that? Maybe over here in the maroon jacket. Thank you. Hi, Davida.
Hi. Don't laugh. But I
Now I'm
used to
gonna have
be
to laugh.
very, very shy and
What?
not speak up. Exactly. It wouldn't speak up at all. And what changed it for me is getting really involved with my passion, my peacemaker work. And I was so focused on that I couldn't think about the fact that I didn't want to speak up and say something or do something.
Say some more about the work that you were passionate about.
Oh, this is the Peacemaker Group is a group of, I'm, what do you call it? Advisor for a donor fund if somebody wants to pass and wanted to give his money to increase the world awareness of our next generation of leaders and teach Gandhian methods of conflict resolution. And we were doing that, sending young people abroad not to visit, but to work. To work, get their hands dirty, work for nonprofits.
Closer to your mouth.
And, yes, and, I'm sorry, yes, nonprofits, and we were doing that with, another one was Hands of Peace, where you see two sides of a story. But, and then life happened, and we realized that there was violent conflict resolution, started working with immigrants and asylees and all of that. So anyway, 40 groups later, I've said enough.
Well, thank you for all that work, but I love the overarching point. So the passion and the vision pushes aside the self-consciousness. And it's the same, I'm feeling the same kind of thing in Robert's story, that when you fall in love with the work, with what Gandhi called the means, then you let go of the ends. And we were talking about that a little bit last week, that's what working without attachment means. You don't have to play Bach perfectly. You just want to, and you're just in awe of the beauty of this piece that you're playing, and you're happy with however it's coming out right now, happy enough, and there's always room for improvement later. And with this too, the idea of working with young people, Palestinians, Israelis, I know that you were working across all those conflict barriers. What could be more important than that? And changing lives on that micro level. So that is another story. For me, I was just thinking about wadding up a piece of paper and throwing it in the trash can in the corner and it goes right in. Y'all are much more noble and elevated than I am with your examples. And then it just goes right in. You're astonished because you weren't really trying. And then you wad up 99 more pieces of paper and now you're trying and not one of them goes in. And so I just started thinking about effortfulness versus a kind of allowing the action to sort of shape itself. Do we have another little, yeah, how about in the back row there? A time when you were trying very hard to accomplish something and it wasn't working, and then when you stopped trying, it got better.
I'm a retired public school teacher, and I taught for 30 years. And my very first class, they were second graders. They were 7-year-olds. And after 30 minutes, I taught those kids everything I knew. And I didn't know where to go from there. But I realized that all I ever had to do was listen to them. And that knowledge was hard learned, but that's all I ever had to do to make it work, just to listen to them.
Wonderful, wonderful story. Yeah, you know, I mentor young teachers just out of grad school and sometimes, among other things. And I remember when I first got hired to be a community college philosophy professor, and I called my graduate advisor, who was just on the cusp of retiring, he's in his 70s. And I said, do you ever stop feeling scared? And he said, no. It was a short discussion. He basically said, no. I've been doing this for, 40 years. And when I'm walking down the hall about to go into my classroom, the butterflies just come up, just like I felt walking in this room today before y'all got here. But I've gotten to the point now where I'm no longer afraid, but I don't call it anxiety, I call it energy. Sacred restlessness. You just rename stuff and it gets a lot better. Instead of terror and fear, And in fact, as a performer, both as a musician, a singer, and obviously a speaker, I rely on that. It's like gas in the engine. It's how otherwise I'd be up here kind of going like that. I'm looking at all of you and feeling so grateful that you've brought your energy and inquiry and engagement into the room. I just feel like this whole session doesn't have much to do with me at all. And that is a freeing kind of feeling. It reminds me of the feeling that some of you were describing. There's a second question there in that starting out section at the top of page 13, right at the beginning of the workbook section on this chapter. The second question says, sometimes the religious or spiritual path, kind of pivoting that direction, is described as disciplined and arduous. I'm thinking of the letters of Paul in particular. And those of us participating in the Lenten readings here in this Episcopal community have been reading some pretty strident chunks of Paul's letters lately. He has a lot to say about sex and about this kind of behavior is wrong and this kind of behavior is right, and these people are out and these other people are in, and he's pretty, he's laying down the Boy Scout rule book. Mm-hmm. And some of us are, dutifully reading those things and appreciating Paul's many virtues and gifts, but also challenged a bit by, the guy seems angry a lot. Is that just me? I don't know. I'm editorializing, obviously. Sorry, Paul. Saint Paul, for God's sakes. Sometimes, so let me read the second question. Sometimes the religious or spiritual path is described as disciplined and arduous. What do you think Jesus meant when he said, "My yoke is easy and my burden light"? So I just tricked you into a Bible study discussion for a moment. Atheists are about ready to run out the room here. But that's a really interesting line, and I don't know what it means. Jesus just drops this in Matthew 11:28, when he seems to present a kind of counter-programming message that it isn't arduous and hard. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Would somebody please explain that?
We
have a hand back here, sir. Thank you. What's your take on that?
613 laws that the Jewish people, if they were truly observant, had to observe, and some still do. And he set that aside and reduced it to love of God and love of neighbor and serving those people around you. Rather simple and a light burden.
Thank you. No, that's a really direct, concise answer. I appreciate that. That is certainly a powerful take. And as an educated Jewish teacher, he certainly knows the law and has great respect for it and the temple. I know the gospel writers often portray Jesus as in near constant conflict with the leadership of the temple, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, often known sort of by their nickname, the scribes. So the plot in the narratives of the Gospels is, Jesus as the anti-hero against the religious establishment. But that is a contrast point. Anybody else have a thought about that? What does that feel like to you? Please, back here. My yoke is easy and my burden light.
It made me think of Robert A. Johnson, the Jungian guy, used to be a member here. I was reading his last book, is like his spiritual autobiography, and he was saying in every situation, there's always a choice to do God's will. And the more I thought about it, I think he's right, and I think that's what Jesus is getting at. If you do God's will, it's easy, and fighting it usually gets you in trouble or whatever.
What's God's will? How do you know what's God's will?
Oh, yeah.
You were begging for that. Come on.
Yeah, and usually, to me, it means what's a loving action in this particular situation. But
that's a good start.
It's always a hard one, yeah.
No, to me...
But you sort of feel it intuitively.
Right.
You don't feel any resistance or whatever, or negativity in that moment. It just feels right.
So that's what led me into this whole subject in this chapter as I was reflecting on what do we mean by wu wei? What does it mean to move in accord with the energies around us? And in a theistic, especially a monotheistic system like here, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi were not working under a monotheistic system with a transcendent deity. For them, the Tao, or ultimate reality, was just simply the name of the energy coursing through all things, a kind of pantheism. But the modality of being for the people in these two systems felt really similar to me. And we use in the theistic West language like doing God's will. And to me, when a surfer paddles out and is aiming toward the shore and wants to ride a wave, she is moving her will in a deeply cooperative way with what is unfolding. And is that the sense of cooperation rather than counter action? Yeah, please, let's get you on the microphone. Thanks, Richard. Step in.
Don't normally do this, but
I got him.
you got me. And wait for the sermon too. But
I always do.
yeah, thank you. The idea of a yoke is that it's two creatures.
Yeah.
It's never just one, and so the burden is carried, whether it with the divine being or with the flow of it all. But that's the entire idea, I think, is that it's not ours alone to carry.
Nice. No, that's beautiful. And I think I mentioned in the book, there's an etymological link between the English word yoke, Y-O-K-E, and the Sanskrit word yoga. That the two words seem to come from the same Indo-European root. Indo-European is a language, a proto-language that we don't know, but linguistic historians make the case convincingly that Indo-European, this lost language, was the source of both Sanskrit in the East and Latin in the West. That's why there are so many words between Sanskrit and English that are aligned, like yoga and yoke. The Hindu god of fire, Agni, and the English word ignition, or to ignite, or even cognition. And I'll stop there. There's dozens of these words that remind us that the conceptual distinction between East and West is just that. It's conceptual, not real. So that's a very helpful thing. Yoke, and in the Hindu tradition, yoga is designed to integrate disparate energies, to bring, as in the example of in the agricultural image, to bring two oxen who are often meandering on their own, to unite them. And to integrate means to unify. And the word yoga means to unify through practice, through discipline, to bring, in this case, the disparate energies of mind and body into one alignment toward a specific goal. That's the other thing about a yoke, right? It's helping the farmer pull a steel plow through a field to cut a row to plant seeds. So it's taking these energies, these oxen, the energies of consciousness, uniting them toward a specific aim, namely union with the divine. And that is what yoga is about at its root, and what religion is about. Religio means to, again, to connect back, to link together. So to me, the word religion and yoga are also very connected, and allowance seems to be at the heart of it all. There's a couple of Taoist quotes in here that might anchor this section, and then we'll move into the rest of our subjects. Let's see, I'm looking at 130. Yeah, there's a line on page 130. Now I'm in the book itself from the Tao Te Ching. Rushing into action, you fail. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. Therefore, the master takes action by letting things take their course. So I think as we all reflect on our own creative work, our professional work, the garden we are planting, the book you are writing, the poem we are struggling with, the music we are mastering, the soup we're gonna make this afternoon, it is soup weather, I mean, come on. And you know, all the things that we create, there's this strange unification of assertion and planning and allowance and spontaneity. You know, I'm not a landscape architect, but I just planted a box in front of my house, a planter box in front of the front window. And I just went to the garden center and I bought like 8 plants. And I came home and I think these are gonna work here. And then I got home and I just sort of stuck the pots on top and just took a look, and I didn't have a real plan. I let the plant, this is a trick I took from my Vietnamese gardener who comes and does all of our landscaping. I let the plants tell me where they wanted to go. I watch him carefully prune trees and shrubs in our yard, and he clearly, intuitively understands what these plants want to be. He doesn't shape, this isn't a French garden. He's not making pointy conical shapes out of junipers. He is taking his cue from what nature has already done. And to me, that's how I want to live my whole life. And that's what ends up being in these quotes. There's another one on page 131, another line from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? Most of us, when we have a problem, this is dirt in the water glass. Here's the image. There's some dirt in a water glass and it's all stirred up and the water's all muddy. And so the image, the question from Lao Tzu 25 centuries ago is, how do you make the water clear? Now, in my life, I just keep stirring. I think if I stir just correctly enough and masterfully enough, the water will be clear. But Lao Tzu's suggestion clearly is step back, put down the stick, wait. And how many of us have sort of, quote unquote, solved problems in our lives by just waiting 3 days? And 3 days later, the problem goes away. Instead of me agonizing night and day and buying things and reading books about how to fix it and just all this efforting, what if Wu Wei is an important contribution to the consideration of what effective action is? Again, middle path. We're not counseling that you ever do anything at all. Like, instead of paying my taxes this year, Wu Wei. Let's wait for the IRS letters to pile up. And that's clearly not what we're talking about. A surfer doesn't just stand on the shore and stare out at the sea. Let's touch on this one question. I feel like there's so much in this chapter. I was talking with some friends before we started. It's tough to talk about a whole chapter in 30 minutes and then another chapter in another 30 minutes, leaving 90% of it out. But I feel like we have to touch on this idea of number 8. I'm back to the guidebook. Number 8, the question is, if you have practiced meditation and prayer, would you mind sharing some thoughts about how they are both similar and different? Because it's like a Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap in the middle between meditation and prayer. I know there's a wonderful centering prayer community here at St. Paul's, which is explicitly a combination of the two. But if you have practiced meditation or prayer in your life and you have maybe a thought about that, how are they different and how are they similar? Does anybody want to talk about that? I would like to know. Oh, we have somebody back here, please.
Perhaps the sense is not to find dualism between prayer in action and meditation in peace, to find the subtle medium via media
Yes.
or sense of connection, empathy, spiritual empathy. That means also human or empathy with the universe, every member, no living member of the universe. I remember some wise, I consider wise suggestion by Thomas Merton suggested that the prayer is not only when you go to pray in action, but it's a sense to be connected.
Yeah.
We pray literally, in the liturgy, but when we're not praying with text, but in silent connection, you could be in connection in some case with the experience of the universe. We have a lot of ways to help.
Yeah. You had me at Thomas Merton. Yeah, that's it. And in Thomas Merton's, if you're not familiar, a Trappist monk in the Roman Catholic tradition, great author, great Christian voice in the 20th century. We lost him too soon, but he writes really powerfully about contemplative prayer. And yes, there is the literal liturgy, or the prayers that we the traditional prayers that we may use on the Christian path and on many other paths. But there's the sense in which there's the prayer behind all of that, the prayer behind the words, that as Thich Nhat Hanh taught in his Buddhist community, walking meditation. Breathing is praying, thinking is praying, acting is praying. And so you really start to expand the definition of prayer, and then it starts to cross over into simply a mindfulness, a consciousness of presence wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And then it starts to sound a lot like meditation, so the distinctions go away. In the chapter, I sort of explore that prayer, at least in a lot of people's minds, is often understood, and I'm talking about among lay people, not folks maybe who attend sessions like this, but prayer is essentially petitionary. You are petitioning the king for a little of a king's attention, who might deign to bestow favor on your pitiable situation, and maybe help you with a health challenge or another struggle. And that's certainly a powerful devotional mode of praying. But that petitionary prayer is just one level, isn't it, of prayer. As Mother Teresa said, real prayer is not talking to God, it's listening to God. And that sounds like a description of meditation, doesn't it? Where you're no longer engaged in conceptual thought at all. You're not asking for anything. You're not even using words. You're entering into the silence, which is what we do in meditation as well. When I teach meditation, it's always about the classic Patanjali Yoga Sutra approach, which is meditation means sinking beneath the waves of the thought stream and entering into that stillness. It takes a little practice, because we are so addicted to identifying with our thoughts. And so when I'm in this building in the next hour and we're reading the Nicene Creed or we're singing the Lord's Prayer, those are classic prayers from many, many centuries ago of people who were creating scripts by which we might enter into a state of being, a state of awareness beyond the words. And in meditation, it's really very similar to just simply allow enough stillness so that one's point of awareness might slip beneath the waves of thought and go to that feeling of oneness. And the bottom line is, let's segue to the fifth stone, wisdom as enjoyment. The bottom line is that when we accept things as they are, when we surrender to current conditions, when we enter into the field of action with the spirit of allowance or cooperation, it feels good. We begin to enjoy our life more. And I had to build a chapter around the wisdom of enjoyment, because philosophy has a bad reputation, especially, and so does religion among the people who want nothing to do with either of them. It's all so serious. Where's the fun? It's all about marching to someone else's drum and doing what you're told. And those are all the misconceptions of all the people who don't come into communities like this. And they, as we all do, misunderstand things that they don't have much experience with. And this reputation, especially bouncing back to philosophy for a minute, is well earned. That philosophy is a bunch of old, people talking about the meanings of words. And it takes a lot of doing in my introduction to philosophy class to lure these young people into the project, to disarm their natural resistance to it, and to show them, hopefully, this is the goal, that the issues under consideration are exactly the struggles they're going through right now. And wouldn't you like to feel more free? Wouldn't you like to feel happier? And so one of the housekeeping chores at the beginning of this chapter, wisdom as enjoyment, is there a difference between pleasure and enjoyment? That's the first question on the workbook. Maybe you can help me out with that a little bit. There's these two words, pleasure and enjoyment. And I wonder if we could maybe think about trying to tease them apart. They're not perfectly synonymous, are they? How might pleasure be a little different from enjoyment? Just off the top of your head. Who wants to help me with that one? Way back here. Can we run the mic there, Sterling? Thanks. Pleasure and enjoyment. How are they different?
This is really quick. Pleasure seems to be kind of fleeting and more surface, and enjoyment seems to have a deeper sense and maybe a little longer lasting.
Thank you. That was my sense of it too, and I see a lot of people nodding. Is that a good starting point? Who wants to say a little bit more about that? Pleasure versus enjoyment. We're thinking pleasure might be shorter, enjoyment might be longer. Why is that? Please.
Well, I can't help think with the word enthusiasm, meaning God within.
Mm-hmm.
And, going back to your lift, when you get that lift in surfing, that's really, you're in the zone. And that is really enjoyable. Maybe like with skiing, or like Robert said with music, you get into that right zone and it just flows. And I'm thinking of the passage, even the young will grow weary and faint, but those who wait for the Lord will rise up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. So you catch that. That's how a neuron fires. That's, a chemical reaction. You get to the right temperature. It just, I don't think they enjoy it, but it's that getting in the zone, and it happens with psychotherapy or whatever. You just catch it. You catch the wave essentially.
So, as we're exploring this idea, enjoyment sounds quite pleasurable, doesn't it? This is my confusion. Oh, we have one back here, please. Thank you. So that's the source of some of my confusion. You just described something really rich about enjoyment, and yet that sounds pleasant and pleasurable. So
I was going to say, enjoyment could be, you could think of it as being sort of a second order pleasure, or something that's more complex. So for example, you probably enjoyed writing your book, but that doesn't mean it was necessarily pleasant writing your book. Or it can be enjoyable to eat a spicy dish, but that doesn't mean that it's just a sort of a simple pleasure. So that you could have these more complex pleasures.
That's a fair structure. I should have called you before I wrote this chapter. That would have helped me, because that's a simple idea than a complex idea, or a compound idea. And enjoyment seems to come up from within. Then it doesn't. Here's one way I explore it in the chapter. That pleasure is a word we use to describe a sensation or an experience that is triggered by an external stimulus. Like I had a really great bowl of ice cream the other night. I just use those sort of small ramekins. I don't eat a giant bowl anymore because I'm 18? So just a ramekin, because a little is a lot. And I leave the ice cream on the counter for a good 20 minutes. When I'm really desperate, I put it in the microwave. Anybody here microwave ice cream? It sounds really crazy, doesn't it? But when it comes out of the freezer, it just breaks spoons. You can't get any out. You shouldn't eat ice cream out of the freezer. That's like eating butter out of the refrigerator. Barbarians. Room temp. And with ice cream, I put it on when I do it properly, I put it on the counter for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and the whole condition of the ice cream changes. The flavor comes out, the texture changes out. It has just that elasticity, that creaminess obviously into ice cream. And I had a little bowl of ice cream the other night, and it was extremely pleasurable, but it was because of the ice cream. And when the ice cream is gone, the pleasure, stops. I have a memory now. That's not as good as the spoon going in your mouth. So pleasure seems to be connected to a stimuli, to a series of stimuli around us. But enjoyment doesn't seem to have that. It seems to come up from within. And that's what caught my attention, and it started making me think about how it connects to all of the other things that we've been doing already so far. Let me look at page 170. I'm now bouncing to the book for just a moment. Chapter 5. Here's how I explore it on page 170 and 171. Although enjoyment and pleasure are deeply interrelated, as we've been sharing, enjoyment is somewhat different from pleasure because enjoyment is internally self-sustaining and not dependent on outside stimuli. Pleasure, in contrast, is a response to a stimulus like receiving a gift, seeing a rose in bloom, or tasting delicious food, perhaps ice cream. Here, the pleasure only lasts as long as the stimulus. Lasting enjoyment, in contrast, is a subtler experience that reverberates long after the stimulus has passed. Now, just to go a little further here, joy is not the result of a sufficient accumulation of pleasures. That's my assertion. Joy is not the result of a sufficient accumulation of pleasures, nor is joy a possession. Joy has nothing to do with outer conditions. Joy is an inside job. As the word implies, enjoyment is the embodiment of joy. Joy is a complex, multifaceted state of being encompassing all of our faculties. It arises from within and leaves us with an unmistakable glow. No one has to tell you you're experiencing joy. You feel it in your body, mind, heart, and soul. And where does joy come from? What triggers it to well up within us? True enjoyment is the natural result of a life lived in the consciousness of acceptance, surrender, engagement, and allowance. That's what the chapter explores, and that's the sense in which this conceit of arranging these 7 ideas as a path, making sure that the 4th stone contains the first 3, the 5th stone contains the first 4, the 6th stone contains and so on. And that's the sort of cumulative snowball going downhill effect of moving through these stones in this particular order. So my sense is that, and this is what the chapter explores, that enjoyment is our birthright. And that's in fact an idea that we get explicitly in Hinduism. That one of the goals of being alive, Hinduism teaches, is kama, K-A-M-A, which means in Sanskrit pleasure or enjoyment. And again, I'm just sort of conflating those for simplicity's sake here in our conversation. And the reason why kama is a legitimate way to live in Hinduism is because of the non-dualistic theology of Hinduism, that everything is Brahman, which is the sacred ground of being. All energy, all matter, and all consciousness is the outpouring of this sacred formless source. So each of us is Brahman, the eternal, formless, divine source here in temporality, here in embodiment, and therefore everything around you is also that. And so enjoying the world is a sacred experience, can be a meditative, connective experience, a beautiful sunset, a star-filled sky. I was at the Chris Stapleton concert last night at Petco, bragging, and it was remarkable to sit out. I was a little afraid because it rained, as you know, all day yesterday, and the clouds mysteriously parted at 5 p.m. as we walked in, and I sat there in all of my rain gear. I didn't need a lick of it, not one drop came down, and I enjoyed this 5-hour glorious concert, and the stars were coming out, and it's just good to be alive. Sitting outside in 58-degree air with my down jacket and my rain jacket and my weatherproof boots, I was as comfy as a clam. And the crowd was warm and friendly, and the music was sublime. And I'm like, this is pretty good. And kama is that moment that can of awareness that can come anytime, of realizing the pleasure and joy that is always all around us. But we also have some baggage in the Western tradition, and I want to go back to the workbook. Under the Going Deeper section on the chapter 5 page there, the question number 4. Let's talk about this. Do you ever, and this, we don't have much time, but this could be a whole weekend retreat topic. Do you ever feel guilty or shameful when experience pleasure or enjoyment? Like if you eat the whole carton of ice cream, let's not get into that really nasty stuff. If you just eat the whole carton of ice cream because you just lost your mind. Like, do you ever get home from the grocery store and you bought a carton of ice? I'm back on the ice cream. You can't stop me. And you get home from the grocery store, especially in the summer, and the groceries have been in the trunk for 20 minutes. And you get home and you're putting the ice cream away, and it's like, and you grab a little paring knife and you cut that plastic ring off the top, and you open the top and you say, I'm just gonna like take that real soft stuff around the edges. And especially if it's a pint of Haagen-Dazs or Ben and Jerry's, and all of a sudden, you're scraping the bottom, and you're like, I just lost my freaking mind here. A little too much comma, a little too much pleasure, and so that's clearly a mistake. Because then you have a stomach ache the rest of the day. You've had your entire fat and sugar allotment for the week in one moment. It was a wrong turn in your consumption. And so I want to ask you about that. As you reflect on this question, do you ever feel guilt or shame around pleasure and enjoyment? What might be the deeper roots of this? Or why do you think that is? And I don't even know what I'm asking here. I just want somebody to confess. I've been pouring my guts out. Let's talk about shame and guilt. Why is that such a part of our worldview, particularly here in the Western tradition, around pleasure? Let's see if any. Oh, good, we got some. Oh, the hands are firing up. Good. Please.
For me, it's when it's mindless and it's just totally, I'm totally engaged in eating that ice cream without thought of anything else.
Okay, so you kind of lose, it's like a shark, your eyes roll back in your head and you're like, you're not even there. The spoon's just going. You're like, I don't even know what happened. So one wonders then how much is one really enjoying that? And how much is just sort of a compulsion? Yeah, please, who else? Can we come up here, Sterling? Bear your guilt and shame for us.
So, I volunteer at Father Joe's to feed the homeless. And for me to do that, I just feel such great joy and love being there. And yet at the same time, I look at these people that I'm talking to and helping serve, and I think, there but by the grace of God go I. I mean, I just think how sad that is that they got all wet from the rain, and here I am in my, warm, comfy clothes and socks. And so I have this guilt. At the same time, I'm just so drawn to being there and doing that and feel so good about it.
I appreciate you sharing that. Driving downtown in the rain last night, down Imperial, looking for the parking structure where we were going to go. You're driving by all these encampments of people under their tarps in the pouring rain, and the curious warmth of that community amongst themselves in these wretched, to me, in my suburban home with a functional roof, in these wretched conditions. And I wonder if that's guilt and shame or if that's just empathy and compassion. And I'm not, it's above my pay grade to offer therapy to myself or anyone else on this, but it's a very interesting spiritual philosophical question to navigate that. Is there some shameful messaging? And again, I'm thinking back on some of Paul's letters. Was it just yesterday? For those of you reading through the Lenten book and reading those Paul's passages, there's just a lot there about what reads to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of induction of shame and guilt around sexuality.
Oh yeah.
That a very narrow prescription of, he says, the best thing to do to be a follower of Christ is to be like me, celibate, to be asexual. At least that's what he claims. We don't know what his life was like at all. But if you're not strong like me, then you should get married, because that's the only place that sexual expression can be enjoyed. Outside of a heterosexual marriage, one man, one woman, there can be no sexual experience without cutting yourself off from God. I'm like, all right, Paul, I'm going to be over here while you talk like that. And I'll come back later in a later passage when I'm like, okay, now I'm feeling it again. So a lot of us in the room, even committed members of this community, go through various struggles around these kinds of teachings. And I'm not here to psychoanalyze Paul. I don't know much about him other than everything I've read about him, and I still don't know much about him. He's pretty much an enigma. But that shameful message that all pleasure is a sin, unless it is channeled into this one way that some guy wrote in a letter 2,000 years ago, allows me to experience it. And how much authority do I give to that one voice? And how much do I ignore the authority of my own discernment, my own authority? I'm sorry, but I read too much Thoreau in high school. Whatever offends my soul, no matter how esteemed the source, reject it. And that's, what kept me out of organized religion for most of my life. And so I'm wrestling with a lot of that in this passage here. So it seems to me there's a section in this chapter on wild strawberries and an experience I had around that. But there's a passage that I'll just close with. Enjoyment was never about ownership. It is rightfully a nameless experience of the symmetry between our being and the being of the cosmos, a oneness that transcends the concepts and objects of the world of forms. Beauty and joy take us back to our original nature as spiritual beings at play in the field of forms. I appreciate so many of you willing to read this book and to come to these sessions as we think through these things. As you can clearly discern for yourself now, this book doesn't really tell you how to think, how to feel, what's true, what's not true. My sense of philosophy is that it is an invitation into an inquiry, and that's what I continue to experience here. I'm so humbled by St. Paul's willingness to not only allow me to come in and ask these kinds of questions, but to put them on their YouTube channel to live forever, viewable by people from all over the place. And I'm just really moved by the open-heartedness and open-mindedness of all of you. We have 2 more sessions in this series, and we're going to slow it down. Next week, we're going to just do 1 chapter, chapter 6, Wisdom as Love. And then the final week, 2 weeks from today, we're going to do chapter 7, which is a big one, Wisdom as Integration. And again, if you don't have a workbook and you'd like to grab one, you can on the way out. Although it's free on my website, peterboland.com. It's a PDF. Grab it right there and put it in your device. You can sign up on my mailing list while you're there. And the bookstore is now open. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.